So today we're doing an AMD build around the RX 9060 XT to see what we can realistically put together for $1,500 or under that yields some pretty surprising performance for 1440p. I've seen a few of these videos that either didn't figure in the cost of sponsored parts or didn't weigh in stuff like sales tax, so we're going 100% real world. I did partner with Asus for this video today, so we're using a couple of their parts in the build, and they did provide the GPU, but that cost is figured in. The rest of it I just got in the car and bought, so we're gonna talk real world pricing and things you can sub where it makes sense so you can get the best build for your money. The card we're building around today is an AMD RX 9060 XT. This is a prime card from Asus. I've seen this price anywhere from $349 to $369, so we're gonna split the difference and call it $360. And that is for the 16 gig VRAM version, which will be a little harder to find, but definitely worth it over the 8 gig version if you can afford to stretch that extra 60 or so bucks. This is a 2.5 slot, and even though we're not using a small form factor case today, these prime cards work just fine for small form factor builds. These use 3 of their Axial Tech fans. These are dual ball bearing, do a solid job of cooling, and have a 0 dB mode when your temps are under 55 degrees. Got a big vented backplate here too. No RGB, nothing flashy, just a minimal effective design that gets it done. And this has their max contact design that yields an extra 5% of cooling surface area, a grade 304 stainless backplate, and dual BIOS. Power connector is an absolutely non-controversial single 8-pin. For the CPU today, I opted to go with the AMD Ryzen 7 7700X. I got this at Micro Center for $229. I know a lot of times that Micro Center has way better pricing on CPUs, especially if you can get a bundle deal, and people get understandably salty when they don't live close to one. I too have felt that pain. But the good news here is that this is only $10 more on Amazon, so not a huge price delta. If you want to save some money here, you can always go with the 9600X for $160 or $179 depending on where you buy. The 9600X has slightly higher, like 3% higher single core speed, but the 7700X has 8 cores, 16 threads instead of 6 and 12. If you were strictly gaming, the 9600X will probably get it done, but if you're planning on doing any streaming or any kind of content creation, those extra cores can come in clutch. Motherboard is the Tough Gaming B650 Plus Wi-Fi. This was $190 at Micro Center and nearly $20 less on Amazon. It's a pretty simple, stealthy design, support for up to 3 M.2 drives, a pretty healthy I/O selection with an integrated backplate, 2.5 gig Ethernet, Wi-Fi 6, and some pretty beefy heatsinks. For memory, I picked up a 32 gig kit of DDR5 6000 from Crucial. This is CL36 and supports both Intel XMP and AMD Expo profiles. This was $87. It has no RGB, which I always personally choose because it's cheaper and it's generally lower profile. That to me always comes in handy if you feel like you might want to experiment with small form factor down the road, but if you want to spend a little more for some lighting, knock yourself out. For storage, I grabbed a 2 terabyte NVMe M.2 Western Digital Black. This is the SN770. This is a Gen 4. We get read speeds of 5150 and writes up to 4850. At $124, these were $10 more than their 2 cheapest options, but I went this way because I've personally used these a lot in my NOS builds, and I've always found them to be both fast and reliable. PSU is the ROG Strix 750 watt gold. This was $130. It's the Aura edition, and it has some lighting. It is fully modular, and the cables are nice. $750 should be good for this build, but you can save yourself anywhere from $10 to $30 by going with a different power supply. The case I was kind of on the fence about. I wanted to do one of those rounded fish tank builds because I'd never done one before, and I know that the Montech King 95 reviewed really well last year. There are technically 2 versions of this case. The standard version, though, is getting very hard to find. Micro Center had one left on sale for $64, which was very tempting, but it included no fans, and those can add up quick. I opted for the Pro version because it includes 6 pre-installed fans. They've already done the work of figuring out which size fans need to go where and which ones are standard versus reverse flow. And they have a massive, like 11 port fan and lighting controller already installed. I got this for $170 and it's $10 cheaper on Amazon. For cooling, I decided to keep that party going with a Montech Hyperflow ARGB 240mm AIO for $90. The fans on here are different than the case fans, and this branding is horrendous, but since we'll be installing it in the roof, it's probably not going to be a factor. There is room in the top of this case for a 360, but they were out of stock on the ARGB version, and I figured if we're going to do all this lighting in the case, we may as well get the pump top to match. Now, if you're not into all the lighting and you want something that looks a little bit more grown up, which is totally understandable, my current favorite mid-tower case right now is the Flux SE from Antec. It's got some wood on the front. This version has sound dampened side panels on both sides, excellent cooling, and includes 5 fans, all for under $130. Very solid, looks great, very easy to build in. So that brings the total cost of this build today to $1,380 before tax. If we figure an average state and local sales tax of 6.75% in the US, that lands us at $1,473.15, just under the wire. Now let's get this together and see what she can do. All right, the first thing I want to look at with this 9060 XT is native rendering. If you're shopping an entry-level card, you may need to know that native rendering means no AI upscaling and no frame generation, just straight performance. This game list is not cherry-picked, it's my standard review suite. Some old, some new, some that tend to favor NVIDIA, some that tend to favor AMD, and the first thing that jumps out at me is that these are not bad. Nearly 7 of these games are well into 120 FPS territory on average. 3 of the more demanding titles are averaging well over 60 FPS, and a couple will see some dips under 60 FPS. And these are some decent settings too, generally one step below whatever the highest setting is. One exception is Black Myth Wukong, which is very demanding and is required to have some level of upscaling running. Also Black Ops 6, which I have on the basic preset here for minimal graphics that I use when I'm maxing out FPS for competitive play. We'll dive more into that though in a sec. So from here we have 2 options. You can either lower settings to get some more FPS, or we can make use of some of the new tech. Between frame generation and upscaling, I generally go with upscaling because it doesn't add any latency. It's important to note that this card supports AMD's new FSR4, which looks and performs really well, but not every game supports it, and there can be a pretty big quality delta between FSR 2, 3, and 4. Normally we see negative artifacts and aliasing, foliage, and particle effects like here in Dying Light 2, which uses FSR 2. But look at the performance difference this nets us. It takes our average FPS from 88 to 142. That's an insane boost if you don't mind some artifacts. Personally, when it comes to single player games, I like to prioritize graphic fidelity over frame rate, as long as I'm able to hit a consistent 60 FPS. But the other thing this can do is it may allow you to use some effects that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to. Take Cyberpunk, where enabling FSR 3 allows us to go from 86 FPS to 133. I'd probably keep the native rendering, but FSR 3 allows us to use ray tracing on medium settings and still hits a 68 FPS average. There's no way you'd be able to run ray tracing here only using native rendering, and in some games ray tracing's really not worth the performance hit, but it's really good in Cyberpunk. But some titles like Black Ops 6 allow us to natively use the new FSR 4, and there's very little graphical trade-off here. On the basic preset for competitive, we can move from 168 FPS to 194 on balance mode or 209 on performance mode. Playing something like the campaign on ultra details, no upscaling lands us at 106 FPS. Turning on FSR 4 balanced gets us all the way to 153. Being able to use FSR 4 at this tier of card is hugely beneficial because it essentially just allows us to unlock additional performance with little to no trade-off. And the list of supported games is growing. As of a few days ago, that list has grown to over 65 games now. Overall, I'm really impressed with the 9060 XT as a 1440p card, especially when we look at something like Red Dead Redemption 2. There are an awful lot of ultra settings going on here to still be able to average 87 FPS. I spend a lot of time playing way up in the area of diminishing returns, and after looking at this build, I'm gonna have to restructure my recommendations for 1440p and 4K gaming. I mean, $1,500 isn't exactly chump change, but it can start to feel that way when you figure you can get this entire build for 25% less than the cost of a 5090 Founders Edition. For a sub $400 card in the current market, the RX 9060 XT Prime feels like an easy W. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you all in the next one. Stay up.